The old man stood behind the iron gates of a Paris medical academy, his worn hands trembling as he clutched a faded photograph of a little girl, Yetunde Olajide. Inside, applause thundered as a brilliant young doctor stepped forward, her name echoing with pride. When their eyes met, time seemed to stop. Hope filled his tired face, until she looked away. No smile, no recognition, just silence as if he had never existed. How could someone forget the man who gave up everything for her future? Before we continue, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Don't forget to subscribe and join this journey. In the crowded, restless heart of Lagos, where the air carried a mix of dust engine smoke and the distant rhythm of street vendors calling out their wares, lived a man whom most people barely noticed. His name was Yetunde Olajide, though in the neighborhood everyone simply called him Baba Tunde. Not because he was old, but because life had aged him far beyond his years. He owned nothing of real value, no house, no savings, no security. What he did have was a small wooden shed by the roadside, patched together with rusted sheets of zinc and old planks. It served as both his workshop and his shelter. From sunrise to sunset, Baba Tunde fixed broken motorcycles, welded cracked metal frames, and did whatever odd mechanical jobs came his way. Some days he earned just enough to eat. Other days he went to bed with nothing but water in his stomach. But if there was one thing people quietly respected about him, it was this: he never cheated, never overcharged, and never turned away someone in need, even when he had nothing himself. It was on one of those long, exhausting evenings that his life changed forever. The sky had turned a deep orange as traffic crawled along the narrow road near his workshop. Baba Tunde was packing up his tools when a loud screech shattered the usual noise of the street. A car had lost control, swerving violently before crashing into a roadside stall. People screamed. Some ran toward the wreck. Others stepped back, afraid. Baba Tunde didn't hesitate. He dropped everything and rushed forward, pushing through the gathering crowd. The car was badly damaged, its front crushed smoke rising from the hood. Inside, 2 adults lay motionless. The scene was chaotic, people shouting, someone calling for help, but no one seemed to act. Then he heard it. A faint sound. A cry. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. "Wait," Baba Tunde said, his voice firm as he leaned closer to the back seat. There, partially hidden beneath a torn cloth and debris, was a little girl. Her face was streaked with tears and dust, her small body trembling. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. "Easy, easy," he whispered gently, reaching in. The door was jammed, but Baba Tunde forced it open with all the strength his worn body could gather. Carefully, he lifted the child into his arms. She clung to him immediately, her tiny fingers gripping his shirt, as if he were the only solid thing left in her world. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're safe now." The crowd watched as he carried her away from the wreckage. Ambulances eventually arrived, sirens piercing the air, but by then Baba Tunde already knew something deep in his chest. The child had survived, but her world had not. Later that night, after the authorities had taken the bodies and the crowd had dispersed, Baba Tunde sat outside his small shed with the girl wrapped in an old cloth. She had stopped crying, but her eyes remained wide, lost searching for something that was no longer there. "What is your name?" he asked softly. There was a pause. Her lips trembled before she answered in a small, fragile voice. "Yetunde, Yetunde," he repeated, nodding slowly. "That's a beautiful name." She said nothing more. No relatives came that night. No one came the next day, or the day after that. The authorities did what they could, but in a city as large and unforgiving as Lagos, children without families often slipped through the cracks. There were talks of sending her to an overcrowded orphanage on the outskirts of the city. Babatunde listened quietly as one of the officials explained the process. "She will be taken care of," the man said, though his tone lacked conviction. Babatunde looked down at Yetunde, who sat beside him, holding on to the edge of his shirt again. Her silence spoke louder than any words. He had seen those orphanages before. Too many children. Too little care. Too little love. That night sleep did not come easily. He lay on the hard floor of his shed, staring at the cracked ceiling while the sound of distant traffic filled the darkness. His stomach was empty, his body aching from the day's labor, but his mind refused to rest. He thought about his own life, how he had grown up with nothing, how he had survived by sheer endurance. He had no wife, no children, no family left to call his own. And now there was this child, a child who had lost everything in a single moment. By morning, the decision had already been made in his heart. When the officials returned, Babatunde stood straighter than usual. "I will take her," he said. The man blinked in surprise. "Take her, you mean foster care?" No, Babatunde replied, his voice calm but firm. "I will raise her." The official hesitated, glancing at the small, fragile structure behind him, the workshop that barely qualified as shelter. "You understand this responsibility?" he asked. "A child needs food, education, medical care." "I understand," Babatunde interrupted quietly. "Do you have the means?" There was a brief silence. Babatunde looked at his rough, calloused hands that had built nothing but survival. "No," he admitted honestly, "but I have something else." "And what is that?" He turned his gaze toward Yetunde, who was watching him with uncertain eyes. "I will not let her suffer alone." The official studied him for a long moment. Perhaps he saw the sincerity. Perhaps he saw the stubborn kind of love that could not be measured by money. Or perhaps he simply had no better option. The paperwork was minimal, the system imperfect as it was allowed it. And just like that, Yetunde Olajide became his daughter. The first night she stayed with him, the rain fell heavily over Lagos. Water leaked through the roof, dripping into small containers Babatunde had placed around the room. The space was cramped, the air damp and cold. Yetunde sat quietly in a corner, hugging her knees. Babatunde searched through his few belongings before handing her the only blanket he owned. "You take this," he said. "What about you?" she asked softly. "I'm used to the cold," he replied with a small smile. It wasn't entirely true, but she didn't need to know that. As the night deepened, the sound of rain filled the room. Yetunde hesitated for a moment before slowly moving closer to him, her small hand reaching out to hold his. Babatunde froze at first, surprised. Then gently he held her hand back. In that simple, silent gesture, something shifted. Not just for her, but for him too, because for the first time in many years, Babatunde was no longer alone. And though he had nothing to give, no wealth, no comfort, no certainty, he made a quiet promise to himself in that moment. He would give her everything he never had, even if it cost him everything he had. Years passed in the restless rhythm of Lagos, where every sunrise brought both struggle and possibility. In Babatunde's small roadside workshop, life moved slowly but steadily forward. The rusty zinc roof still leaked when it rained, the wooden walls still creaked under heavy winds, and hunger still visited more often than comfort. But something inside that fragile space had changed. There was laughter now. There was purpose. And there was Yetunde Olajide. She grew like a quiet miracle in the middle of hardship, thin, but strong, soft-spoken yet determined. Her eyes, once filled with fear and confusion, slowly began to shine with curiosity and intelligence. From a young age, Yetunde noticed everything, the way her father's hands trembled after long hours of work, the way he pretended not to be hungry when food was scarce, the way he smiled even when exhaustion clung to his face. She understood more than most children her age, and she never forgot. Every morning before school, Yetunde would wake up early to help Babatunde prepare for the day. She swept the dusty ground outside the workshop, arranged his tools in careful order, and fetched water from a nearby tap that often ran dry. "Papa, you forgot this wrench," she would say, handing it to him with a small smile. Babatunde would chuckle. "Ah, so now you are the boss of the workshop." "Yes," she replied playfully. "And you are my worker." For a moment, the weight of life would lift. But once she left for school, reality returned. School itself was not easy. The building was overcrowded with cracked walls and broken desks. Teachers came and went, some dedicated, others indifferent. Many children dropped out early, forced to work, or simply unable to keep up. Yet Yetunde stood out. Not because she had more resources, she had less than most, but because she refused to give up. She listened carefully in class, asked questions when others stayed silent, and stayed behind after lessons to study from worn-out textbooks. At night she read by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, her eyes straining, but her mind focused. And Babatunde watched. He watched her hunger, not for food, but for knowledge. He saw the way she held onto her books like they were something sacred. And deep inside, something stirred. One evening, after a long day of work that had earned him barely enough to buy a small portion of rice, Babatunde returned to the workshop to find Yetunde sitting quietly, her schoolbook open, but untouched. "Yetunde," he called gently. "Why are you not reading today?" She looked up slowly. Her usual bright expression was dimmed. "There is something I don't understand," she admitted. He sat beside her. "Tell me." She hesitated, then pointed to a picture in her book, a drawing of a hospital room, a doctor standing beside a patient. "They say doctors can save people, even when they are very sick," she said softly. "Yes," Babatunde replied. "That is true." Her fingers traced the page. If there was a doctor that day, maybe my parents would still be alive." The words hung in the air, heavy and painful. Babatunde felt something tighten in his chest. He had never spoken much about that night. He had always feared reopening the wound. But now he saw that the memory had never left her. Yetunde took a deep breath. "Papa, I want to become a doctor." The simplicity of her words carried a weight far beyond her years. "I want to help people who have no one," she continued, "people like us." Babatunde looked at her carefully. There was no childish fantasy in her voice, no passing dream. This was something deeper, something real. "Do you know what it takes to become a doctor?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes, it is difficult. It takes many years. And money," he added gently. She lowered her gaze. "I know." Silence filled the small room. Outside, the sounds of Lagos continued, cars honking, people shouting, life moving on without pause. For a moment, Babatunde said nothing, because he was thinking about the impossibility of it, thinking about the cost of education, the long years, the sacrifices required, thinking about his own reality, his empty pockets, his fragile health, his uncertain future. And yet, he also thought about the girl sitting beside him, the girl who had lost everything and still chose to dream of saving others, the girl who never complained, never demanded, never gave up. Slowly, Babatunde reached out and placed his rough hand over hers. "Yetunde," he said softly, "look at me." She lifted her eyes. "If this is your dream, then it is no longer just your dream." Her brows furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "It means," he continued, his voice steady, "we will carry it together. But Papa, I may not have money," he interrupted gently. "I may not have connections, but I have something stronger." "What?" He smiled faintly. "I have the will to fight." Tears filled Yetunde's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "I will study hard," she'd promised. "I will not waste your effort." "I know," he said. "You already make me proud." From that night on, everything changed. Babatunde worked longer hours than ever before. He took on jobs others refused, repairing engines late into the night, traveling across the city for small repairs, even carrying heavy loads when mechanical work was scarce. His body grew weaker, but his determination grew stronger. Every coin he earned was carefully saved. Sometimes he skipped meals so Yetunde could have enough. Sometimes he walked long distances to save transport money. And Yetunde noticed. "Papa, you should eat," she would say, pushing her portion toward him. "I already ate earlier," he would lie. She didn't always believe him, but she understood. So she studied even harder. Years passed, and Yetunde's dedication began to show. She became one of the top students in her school, earning recognition from teachers who had once overlooked her. Her name was spoken with admiration, her performance opening doors that once seemed closed. One day her principal called her into the office. "There is an opportunity," he said, "an international scholarship program." Yetunde's heart raced. For students with exceptional performance, he continued, it could lead to medical training, even abroad. Her breath caught. "Abroad," she whispered. "Yes, but it is highly competitive." She didn't hesitate. "I will try." That evening she ran back to the workshop, her excitement impossible to contain. "Papa," she called, her voice filled with hope. Babatunde looked up from his work. "What is it, my daughter?" She told him everything about the scholarship, the opportunity, the possibility of becoming the doctor she had always dreamed of being. As she spoke, her eyes shone brighter than he had ever seen, and though fear quietly crept into his heart, fear of what it would take, fear of what might come, he pushed it aside. Because this was the moment they had been working toward. This was the door they had been waiting for. When she finished, she looked at him, her voice softer now. "Do you think I can do it?" Babatunde wiped the grease from his hands and stood up slowly. He walked over to her and placed both hands on her shoulders. "Yetunde," he said firmly, "you are not just capable." He paused, his eyes filled with quiet pride. "You were born for it." And in that moment, neither of them fully understood the price that would soon be demanded. But one thing was certain. Babatunde had already made his choice. No matter the cost, he would not let her dream die. The day the letter arrived, the air in Lagos felt heavier than usual, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Yetunde stood outside Babatunde's workshop, the envelope trembling in her hands. It had traveled across oceans stamped with foreign markings and official seals she had only ever seen in textbooks. Her name, Yetunde Olajide, was printed clearly across the front, as if it belonged to a world far beyond the dusty roadside where she now stood. "Papa," she called softly. Babatunde looked up from the motorcycle engine he had been repairing. His face was smeared with oil, his shirt damp with sweat. But the moment he saw the expression on her face, something inside him shifted. "What is it?" he asked, wiping his hands quickly. She stepped closer, unable to hide the mixture of fear and hope in her eyes. "It's from the scholarship program." For a second, neither of them moved. Then Babatunde nodded slowly. "Open it." Her fingers struggled with the edge of the envelope before finally tearing it open. The paper inside was crisp, official, intimidating. Her eyes scanned the words once, then again, as if her mind needed time to catch up with what her heart already felt. "What does it say?" Babatunde asked, his voice quieter now. Yetunde looked up, her lips parting, but no words came. Tears filled her eyes. "Yetunde?" "I got it," she whispered. The words barely made a sound, but they carried the weight of years of sacrifice. "I got the scholarship." For a moment, Babatunde simply stared at her, as if trying to understand what that truly meant. Then slowly, a smile broke across his tired face. Small at first, then wider, fuller, brighter than anything Yetunde had ever seen. "You did it," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "You really did it." Yetunde nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks now. "They accepted me into the medical program, in Paris." The name of the city felt almost unreal on her tongue. Paris, a place of opportunity, of dreams, of a life neither of them had ever imagined reaching. Babatunde let out a soft laugh, half joy, half disbelief. He pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her as if afraid she might disappear. "My daughter," he murmured, "you have made me proud." For that brief moment, everything felt possible. But then reality returned. Yetunde pulled back her expression, shifting. "There's something else," she said. Babatunde's smile faded slightly. "What is it?" She handed him the letter. "They are giving me a partial scholarship," she explained. "It covers tuition, but not everything." He scanned the paper slowly, his eyes moving carefully over the unfamiliar words. The numbers, however, needed no translation. Accommodation, travel, living expenses. They were far beyond anything he had ever seen. "How much?" he asked quietly. Yetunde hesitated before answering. "It's a lot." Silence settled between them, again heavier this time. The dream was within reach, but only just. That night the workshop felt smaller than ever. The sounds of the city outside seemed distant, almost muffled, as if the world had narrowed down to a single, impossible question. How? Babatunde sat alone long after Yetunde had gone to sleep. The letter lay open in front of him, its words pressing against his thoughts like a constant reminder of what stood between his daughter and her future. He counted his savings. It wasn't enough, not even close. He thought about borrowing money, but from who? The people around him struggled just as much as he did. There was no one to turn to. He thought about giving up. But that thought didn't last long, because he remembered her face. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke about becoming a doctor. The way she had never asked for anything until now. And slowly, painfully, he began to understand something. If this dream was going to survive, it would cost him everything. The next morning, Babatunde woke up before dawn. He didn't tell Yetunde what he had decided. Instead, he went to the one place he had avoided for years, the small piece of land on the edge of the city, where a fragile, half-finished house stood. It wasn't much, just a single-room structure made of cement blocks with a tin roof that rattled in the wind. It had taken him years to build one brick at a time, saving whatever little he could. It was meant to be their future, a place where Yetunde could study comfortably, a place where they could finally live with a bit of dignity, a place he had dreamed of finishing someday. Now he stood in front of it, staring quietly. His hands brushed against the rough wall, feeling every crack, every imperfection, every memory. "This was supposed to be your home," he whispered under his breath. For a long moment he said nothing more. Then he turned away. The decision had already been made. By midday, Babatunde was sitting in front of a local property agent. "You want to sell the man?" asked, clearly surprised. "Yes." The agent looked at him carefully. "Are you sure the market is not favorable right now? You may not get a good price." "I don't need a good price," Babatunde replied calmly. "I need a quick one." The man raised an eyebrow. "What is the urgency?" Babatunde paused, then simply said, "My daughter's future." There was something in his voice that ended the conversation. Within days, the small house was gone, sold for far less than it was worth. But enough to pay for Yetunde's flight. Enough to cover her first months in Paris. Enough to open the door. When Babatunde returned to the workshop that evening, Yetunde was waiting. "Papa," she said, her voice uncertain. "Where did you go?" He smiled gently. "I went to take care of something important." She studied his face, sensing there was more. What kind of thing? He reached into his pocket and handed her an envelope. Inside was money, more than she had ever seen. Her eyes widened. "Papa, where did this come from?" He hesitated for only a second. "From something I no longer need." Her heart tightened. "What do you mean?" He placed his hands on her shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. "It means you are going to Paris." The words felt unreal. "No," she whispered. "Papa, this is too much. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he said firmly. "But what about you? I will be fine." She shook her head, tears forming again. "You always say that." "And I am always right," he replied with a small smile. But this time something felt different, something unspoken. Yetunde looked at the money again, then back at him. "What did you give up?" she asked quietly. Babatunde didn't answer immediately, because the truth was too heavy. Instead, he simply said, "Nothing that matters more than you." And in that moment, Yetunde didn't fully understand. She saw the sacrifice, but not the depth of it. Not yet. Because some sacrifices are too large to be understood until it is almost too late. As the days passed and preparations began, excitement mixed with fear. The journey ahead was unknown, filled with challenges neither of them could predict. But one thing was certain. The path to Yetunde's dream had been paid for. Not with money alone, but with everything Babatunde had ever hoped to keep. And though he stood there smiling, encouraging her to go forward without hesitation, a quiet truth lingered beneath it all. He had just given away the only place he could have ever called home, and now there was no turning back. The morning Yetunde left Lagos, the sky was unusually quiet. No rain, no harsh sun. Just a pale, gentle light stretching across the city as if the world itself was pausing to witness the moment. At the airport, everything felt too large, too fast, too unfamiliar. People moved with purpose, dragging suitcases, speaking in hurried tones. Screens flickered with destinations Yetunde had only ever read about. Paris, her destination, her future, and yet standing there beside Babatunde, all she could feel was a heavy knot tightening in her chest. "I've never been anywhere like this," she whispered, clutching her small travel bag. Babatunde smiled softly, though his eyes carried a quiet exhaustion. "You will get used to it," he said. "You always do." She looked at him. Really looked this time. His shirt was clean, but worn thin. His sandals had been repaired too many times to count. His hands, once strong and steady, now showed signs of strain, small tremors he tried to hide. "Papa," she began, her voice trembling. "Maybe I shouldn't go." He shook his head immediately. "No. But what if Yetunde?" He interrupted, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. "This is your path. You cannot turn away from it now." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't want to leave you alone." A brief silence passed between them. Then Babatunde gave a small, almost playful smile. "Who told you I will be alone?" he said. "I have my workshop, I have my customers, I have my stubborn life." She tried to smile back, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "And you have me?" she added quietly. "Yes," he nodded. "I have you?" The announcement for boarding echoed through the terminal. Time was running out. Yetunde hesitated, her feet refusing to move. Babatunde reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn object, a folded piece of cloth. Carefully, he opened it to reveal the old photograph he had kept for years. It showed a little girl no older than 5, smiling shyly beside a younger version of himself. Dusty, poor, but alive. "This is for you, he said. She frowned. "But you always keep this." "And now you will keep it," he replied. So you never forget where you come from. Her hands trembled as she took it. I could never forget you, Papa. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gently adjusted the strap of her bag, as if buying himself a few more seconds. When things become difficult, he said finally, remember why you started. I will. And when you feel alone, she swallowed hard. I will call you. He nodded, though something flickered in his eyes. Yes, you will call me. The final boarding call came. This time she had no choice. Yetunde stepped forward, then stopped again. Before she could think, she turned back and threw her arms around him, holding him tighter than ever before. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Babatunde closed his eyes briefly, holding her just as tightly. Go, he murmured. Make your life mean something. She pulled away slowly, her face wet with tears. Then, with one last look, she turned and walked toward the gate. Babatunde stood there long after she disappeared from sight. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't wipe the tear that finally slipped down his cheek, because in that moment something inside him understood. He hadn't just sent her to Paris. He had let go of the only family he had left. Paris was everything Yetunde had imagined, and nothing like it at the same time. The cold air hit her first, sharp and unfamiliar. The buildings stretched high and elegant, the streets lined with people who seemed to move with quiet confidence. Everything was ordered. Everything was distant. At the university, she felt it immediately. She didn't belong. Her clothes were simple compared to the polished outfits of other students. Her accent stood out. Her hesitation marked her as different. Where are you from? One student asked during orientation. Nigeria, she replied. The girl nodded politely, but the conversation didn't continue. Yetunde felt it again, that quiet distance, that invisible line. But she didn't come this far to turn back. She focused on her studies. Hours turned into days, days into weeks. The workload was overwhelming. Lectures were fast-paced, filled with unfamiliar terms and expectations. She often stayed up late, reviewing notes, rereading materials, pushing herself beyond exhaustion. And in those moments of struggle, she called Babatunde. Papa, today was hard, she said one night, her voice tired. You survived it, he replied. That means you are stronger than it. Another time she said, I don't think I am as good as the others. He laughed softly. They have had easier lives, that is all. But you have something they don't. What you know what it means to fight. His words became her anchor, and each time she heard his voice, something inside her settled. But while Yetunde was slowly finding her place, Babatunde was losing his. Back in Lagos, the workshop was no longer enough. Without the house he had sold, he had nowhere to go after work. At first, he slept inside the workshop itself, curling up on the wooden bench using old cloths as blankets. But even that didn't last. One evening, the landlord came. You cannot stay here overnight, the man said bluntly. This is a place of business, not a home. Babatunde nodded quietly. I understand. From that night on, he moved again, to the streets. He found a spot under a broken shelter near a bus stop. It offered little protection from the rain, even less from the cold night air. But it was something. During the day, he worked as usual. During the night, he endured. Still, when Yetunde called, his voice never changed. How are you, Papa? She asked one evening. I am fine, he replied. Are you eating well? Yes. Are you sleeping enough? Of course. Each answer came easily. Each answer was a lie. He couldn't let her worry. Not now. Not when she was so close to her dream. Weeks turned into months. The calls became shorter. Not because Yetunde didn't care, but because her life was changing. She was learning faster, adapting quicker, becoming someone new. And Babatunde slowly became a smaller part of her world. One night after a long day of work, Babatunde sat alone under the shelter, looking up at the dark sky. His body ached. His stomach was empty, but in his hand he held something small, a piece of paper. A note Yetunde had written before she left. "Papa, I will make you proud." He smiled faintly. "You already have," he whispered. Rain began to fall soft at first, then heavier. Water dripped through the broken roof, soaking the ground around him. He didn't move, didn't complain. Because deep down he believed one thing above all else. Every drop of hardship he endured was building the life she deserved. And that was enough, even if it meant losing everything else. Paris did not change Yetunde all at once. It happened slowly, so quietly, that even she did not notice when the shift began. At first she was still the same girl from Lagos, careful with her words, humble in her posture, grateful for every opportunity. She sat in the front row, took detailed notes, and spoke only when she was certain of her answers. Her clothes were simple, her meals modest, her life disciplined. But Paris had its own rhythm, and over time it began to shape her. It started with small things. A classmate named Chimamanda Eze was the first to approach her, not out of kindness but curiosity. Chimamanda was Nigerian too, but from a very different world. Her father owned multiple businesses across Abuja, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had never worried about survival. "You're from Lagos?" Chimamanda asked one afternoon, glancing at Yetunde's worn notebook. "Yes," Yetunde replied. "Which part Ajegunle?" There was a brief pause. Chimamanda smiled politely, but something in her eyes shifted, subtle but unmistakable. "That must have been interesting," she said. Yetunde nodded, unsure how to respond. That was how it began. Soon, Yetunde found herself pulled into a small circle, students like Chimamanda and a young man named Adebayo Cole, who spoke with a refined accent and dressed in tailored suits even on ordinary days. They were brilliant, ambitious, and well-connected. They spoke about internships, family connections, future opportunities. They also spoke about background. "Your story is impressive," Adebayo said one day, leaning back in his chair. "Coming from nothing to here, it's inspiring." "Thank you," Yetunde replied. But he added lightly, "You don't have to keep carrying that story with you." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean you're here now?" he said. "Among us. You don't need to define yourself by struggle." Chimamanda nodded in agreement. "People here don't understand that kind of life," she said. "Sometimes it's better to just move forward." Yetunde said nothing. But the words stayed with her. At first she resisted the idea. She continued calling Babatunde, regularly sharing her experiences, laughing at small stories, asking for advice, even when she didn't need it. But slowly something began to shift. The calls became less frequent, not intentionally, just delayed. "I'll call tomorrow," she would tell herself after a long day. Tomorrow became the next day, then the next. And each time she finally did call, the conversations felt slightly different. Shorter, more distant. "How are your classes?" Babatunde would ask. "They're good," she replied. "Are you eating well?" "Yes." "Are you sleeping enough?" I try. The warmth was still there, but something had changed. She no longer told him everything. She no longer spoke about the people she was meeting, the places she was going, the new world she was slowly becoming part of. Because deep down, she wasn't sure how to explain it. Or maybe she didn't want to. As months passed, Yetunde adapted more fully. She changed the way she dressed, simple clothes replaced with more polished outfits, borrowed at first, then slowly bought with careful savings. She adjusted her accent slightly, softening the edges that marked her as different. She learned when to speak and when to stay silent. and gradually the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming grew wider. One evening during a group study session, the conversation turned unexpectedly. Adebayo laughed as he scrolled through his phone. "You won't believe this," he said. "Someone from my village sent me a message asking for money again." Chimamanda rolled her eyes. "It never ends," she said. "Once they know you're abroad, they think you are responsible for everyone." Adebayo nodded. "Exactly. You have to set boundaries." Then he glanced at Yetunde. "You must have experienced that too." Yetunde hesitated. Her mind flashed briefly to Babatunde, his voice, his quiet questions, his constant support. "No," she said after a moment. "Not really." Chimamanda tilted her head. "No family asking for help?" "No expectations." Yetunde shook her head. "I don't have that kind of responsibility." The words came out more easily than she expected, and once they were spoken, she didn't take them back. Something shifted in that moment, not just in how others saw her, but in how she began to see herself. Later that night, as she walked back to her small dorm room, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement, a strange feeling settled in her chest. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was something quieter, something she chose not to name. Her phone buzzed, a message from Babatunde. "How are you, my daughter?" She stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed, "I'm fine, Papa, busy with school." He replied almost immediately, "I am proud of you." She smiled faintly. But instead of calling, she placed the phone down. "I'll talk to him later," she whispered to herself. But later never came that night, or the next. Days passed, then weeks. And with each passing day, the silence between them grew. Back in Lagos, Babatunde still waited. Every evening after work, he would sit under the dim light near the bus stop, holding his small phone in his hands, waiting. Sometimes it would ring. Most times it wouldn't. But he never complained, because in his heart he believed something simple. She is busy building her future. And that was enough, even if it meant being forgotten in the process. Meanwhile, in Paris, Yetunde continued to rise. Her grades improved, her confidence grew, her world expanded. And with every step forward, the memory of where she came from became a little more distant, not gone, just quieter, easier to ignore, easier to leave behind. Until one day, it would no longer be a memory she could control, but a truth she would be forced to face. Winter arrived in Paris without warning. One morning, Yetunde woke to a world covered in pale silence. Snow rested on rooftops, clung to tree branches, and softened the sharp edges of the city she had slowly begun to call familiar. For many of her classmates, it was a season of beauty, of laughter, photos, and warm cafes. For Yetunde, it was something else. It was cold. Not just the kind that touched the skin, but the kind that crept into the bones, the kind that made her miss Lagos, the heat, the noise, the smell of roadside food, the feeling of belonging. She wrapped her thin coat tighter as she hurried across campus, her breath visible in the air. Her schedule had become relentless lectures, lab work, group discussions, assignments. Every hour was accounted for. Every day pushed her further into a life she had once only dreamed of. And yet beneath all that progress, something quietly strained. She no longer called Babatunde every week, sometimes not even every month. It wasn't that she had forgotten him. It was just easier not to think about the distance. Easier not to feel the weight of everything he had sacrificed. One evening, after a long day at the hospital for clinical observation, Yetunde sat with Chimamanda and Adebayo in a cafe near campus. The warm lights, the soft music, the smell of coffee. It was a world away from everything she had known. "You did well today," Adebayo said, stirring his drink. "The way you handled that patient, impressive." "Thank you," Yetunde replied, though her voice carried a trace of exhaustion. Chimamanda leaned forward. "You're becoming one of the best in our class." Yetunde smiled faintly. "That's the goal." Adebayo nodded approvingly. "You're focused. That's what matters. No distractions." The word lingered. Distractions. Yetunde lowered her gaze slightly. At that moment, her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. "Papa calling?" For a brief second, her heart tightened. Chimamanda noticed. "Aren't you going to answer?" she asked casually. Yetunde hesitated. "It's just someone from home." Adebayo raised an eyebrow. "Important." She shook her head quickly. "No, it can wait." And with that, she silenced the call. The phone stopped vibrating. The moment passed. The conversation continued, but something inside her shifted quietly, almost imperceptibly. Back in Lagos, Babatunde slowly lowered the phone from his ear. The line had gone dead. He stared at the screen for a long moment before letting out a small breath. "Maybe she is busy," he whispered to himself. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. That day had been harder than most. Work had been scarce, and the few jobs he managed to find barely paid enough to buy food. His body felt weaker, now the years of strain beginning to show in ways he could no longer ignore. Still, he worked, because he had to. That evening, as he helped lift a heavy engine block at a roadside garage, something went wrong. The weight shifted suddenly. Before he could react, it slipped. Pain shot through his side as he collapsed to the ground. "Babatunde," someone shouted. The world blurred. Voices became distant. For a moment, everything went dark. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying on a wooden bench. The faces around him were worried. "You need to rest," one of the younger mechanics said. "You cannot keep doing this." Babatunde tried to sit up, wincing as pain spread through his ribs. "I am fine," he muttered. "No, you are not," the man insisted. "You could have been seriously injured." Babatunde shook his head slowly. "I still have work to do. But your body—" "My body will follow," he interrupted quietly. Because stopping was not an option. Not when he still had someone depending on him, even if she no longer called, even if she no longer answered. That night the pain didn't go away. He lay under the broken shelter, clutching his side, his breath uneven. Rain began to fall again, tapping against the rusted metal above him. Cold seeped into his bones. Still, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He stared at it for a long time. Then slowly, he typed a message. "My daughter, I hope you are well. Do not worry about me. Continue your studies." He hesitated before sending it, then pressed the button. The message went through. He closed his eyes, letting the rain wash over him, and whispered almost too softly to hear, "I'm still here." In Paris, Yetunde didn't see the message until much later. It was past midnight when she finally returned to her room, exhausted. She dropped her bag, kicked off her shoes, and collapsed onto the bed. For a few moments she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with everything she still needed to do. Then her phone buzzed again. A notification. She picked it up and saw the message. "My daughter, I hope you are well." Her chest tightened slightly. She read it again and again. There was something in the simplicity of the words, something familiar, something heavy. For a brief moment, the noise of her new life faded, replaced by memories. The workshop, the dim light, the sound of Babatunde's voice. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She could call him now. She could hear his voice. She could close the distance, if only for a few minutes. But then she looked at the time. It was late. She was tired. And tomorrow would come quickly. "I'll reply in the morning," she whispered. She placed the phone beside her, closed her eyes, and let sleep take over. The message remained unanswered. Morning came, then classes, then responsibilities. And once again, the moment passed. Far away, Babatunde woke up to another day. His body still ached, his strength was fading, but his spirit remained. Because in his heart he held on to one simple belief. Everything he was enduring, every pain, every sacrifice, every lonely night, it was all building something greater, even if he could no longer see it, even if the distance between them continued to grow. He smiled faintly as he stood up, steadying himself. "My daughter will succeed," he said quietly. "And that is enough." But somewhere deep beneath that belief, a quiet truth began to form, one that neither of them was ready to face. That sometimes success does not just change your life, it changes who you become. By the time spring returned to Paris, Yetunde Olajide was no longer the girl who had arrived with a single suitcase and a trembling heart. She moved differently now, with confidence, with certainty, with a quiet sense of belonging she had once believed was impossible. Her name had begun to carry weight within the university. Professors noticed her discipline. Supervisors praised her precision during clinical rotations. Even her classmates, those who once saw her as an outsider, now treated her as an equal. Or at least, as someone worth keeping close. "You're going far," Yetunde Adebayo said one afternoon as they walked across campus. "You just need to stay focused." "I am focused," she replied calmly. Chimamanda smiled. "Then keep it that way. No distractions, no unnecessary attachments." The word came again, attachments. Yetunde said nothing, but something in her chest tightened briefly, because deep down she knew exactly what they meant. That evening she stood in front of a mirror in her small apartment, not the cramped dorm room she had once lived in, but a modest studio she now rented with careful budgeting and a small stipend she had earned through academic performance. Her reflection stared back at her. Her clothes were no longer worn or mismatched. Her posture was straighter, her hair styled neatly. Even her voice when she spoke carried a softer, more neutral accent. She looked different. Not entirely unfamiliar, but no longer the same. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. She didn't need to look to know who it might be. For weeks now the pattern had been the same. A call, a message, sometimes both, and sometimes nothing. Yetunde walked over slowly and picked up the phone. A missed call. From Papa. She stared at it for a long moment. There was no anger in her expression, no frustration, just hesitation. She placed the phone back down, not out of cruelty, but out of choice, because answering that call meant stepping back into a part of her life she was trying quietly, carefully to move beyond. That night she sat with Chimamanda and Adebayo at a small gathering hosted by one of their professors. It was the kind of event she would have once felt out of place in soft music, elegant conversation, people discussing research opportunities, futures that stretched far beyond borders. "You're quiet tonight," Chimamanda observed. "Just thinking," Yetunde replied. "About what?" She hesitated, then said, "About how much things have changed." Adebayo nodded approvingly. "That's growth." "Yes," Chimamanda added, "and growth requires letting go of certain things." Yetunde glanced at her. "What kind of things?" Chimamanda shrugged lightly. "Anything that holds you back." The words settled into the air between them, and Yetunde felt them, not as pressure, but as permission. Later that night, back in her apartment, she sat alone in the dim light, her thoughts quieter now. Her eyes drifted to a small drawer near her bed. Inside it was something she hadn't touched in a long time. She opened it slowly, and there it was, the photograph. The same one Babatunde had given her at the airport. A little girl, a younger man, standing together in a world far removed from the one she now lived in. Her fingers brushed over the edges of the photo. For a brief moment, memories returned. The workshop, the nights of studying under dim light, the sound of his voice, the warmth of his presence. She closed her eyes, and then she exhaled, slowly, deliberately, before placing the photograph back into the drawer and closing it, as if sealing something away. The next morning, Yetunde woke with a new kind of clarity. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic, but it was firm. She sat on the edge of her bed staring at her phone. There were messages, missed calls, fragments of a connection that had once defined her world. She picked up the phone, scrolled through the contact list. Her finger hovered over one name. Papa. For a long moment she didn't move, because somewhere deep inside her, something resisted, something quiet, something real, but louder than that, was everything she had become, everything she had worked for, everything she was trying to protect. I need to focus, she whispered to herself. Her finger moved. She tapped. And then she deleted the contact. Just like that. No sound, no warning, no second chance. The name disappeared from the screen, and with it, a part of her past. Yetunde stared at the empty space where it had been. Her chest tightened, but only for a moment. Then she placed the phone down, stood up, and prepared for the day ahead. Because there was no time for doubt, no room for hesitation. She had come too far. Back in Lagos, Babatunde sat under the familiar broken shelter, the early morning light barely touching the ground beneath him. His body was weaker now. The pain in his side had not fully healed. Work had become harder, food scarcer. But still, he woke up each day with the same quiet purpose. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Old, worn, but still working. He pressed a button, waited. Nothing. No new messages. He smiled faintly. Maybe she is studying, he said softly. He tried to call. The line didn't go through. He tried again. Still nothing. A small crease formed on his brow, but he didn't dwell on it. Instead, he placed the phone back into his pocket and stood up slowly. I will try again later, he murmured. Because giving up was never something he had learned. Not in life, not in love, and certainly not now. Yet somewhere deep beneath his quiet hope, a truth was beginning to take shape. One that he could not yet accept. That the distance between them was no longer just measured in miles, but in choices and in silence. Because while Yetunde was moving forward into a life she believed she deserved, Babatunde was slowly becoming a memory she had chosen to leave behind, and he didn't know it yet. But soon, he would. The idea came to Babatunde quietly, like most things in his life. It wasn't born from ambition or pride, but from something much simpler. He wanted to see her, not on a phone screen, not through silence or missed calls, but with his own eyes, to stand somewhere in the same space as Yetunde Olajide, and know beyond doubt that she was truly okay. The thought stayed with him for days, then weeks, growing stronger with each unanswered call, with each message that never came. With each night he sat alone under the broken shelter, staring at the small phone in his hands. At first he told himself it was impossible. Paris was too far, too expensive, too everything. But Babatunde had never been a man who measured life by what was possible. He measured it by what was necessary. And seeing his daughter had become necessary. The decision once made did not need to be spoken aloud. He began to save. Not in large amounts, he had no such luxury, but in small, stubborn ways. He took every job he could find, no matter how difficult. He repaired engines late into the night, carried heavy loads during the day, and accepted tasks others refused. Each coin earned was carefully set aside, hidden in a small cloth he kept close to his chest. Sometimes he skipped meals, sometimes he worked through pain, but always he saved. "You should rest," one of the younger mechanics told him one afternoon, watching as Babatunde struggled to lift a heavy tool. "I will rest later," he replied. When Babatunde paused for a moment, then smiled faintly. "When I see her." The man frowned. "See who? My daughter?" There was something in the way he said it, quiet, certain, that ended the conversation. Months passed. The cloth grew heavier, but never heavy enough. Still, Babatunde did not stop, because hope for him was not something that needed certainty. It only needed direction. Eventually, through persistence and the help of a kind-hearted acquaintance who worked near the port, Babatunde learned of a way. A cheap route, not comfortable, not easy, but possible. It involved long hours, uncertain travel, and risks he barely understood. But when he heard the final cost, he nodded without hesitation. "I will go," he said. The journey began before sunrise. With no suitcase, no proper clothing, only a small bag containing his savings, a bottle of water, and the photograph. Always the photograph. The first leg of the journey took him across borders he had never imagined crossing. Crowded buses, long waits, unfamiliar languages. At times he felt completely lost, but he kept moving, because turning back was no longer an option. There were moments when doubt crept in, when his body protested, when the world felt too large and he felt too small. But each time he reached into his pocket and held the photograph. And that was enough. Days turned into weeks. The journey stretched longer than he had expected. There were nights spent in places he didn't know, surrounded by strangers who did not speak his language. Meals were rare. Sleep was uncertain. But still, he moved forward. One evening, as he sat near a dimly lit roadside in a foreign land, exhaustion finally caught up with him. He leaned against a wall, his breathing heavy, his body aching in ways he could no longer ignore. "Why are you doing this?" someone asked a man sitting nearby, watching him with quiet curiosity. Babatunde looked up slowly. "To see my daughter." The man nodded. "She must be very important." Babatunde smiled faintly. "She is everything." By the time he finally reached Paris, Babatunde no longer resembled the man who had left Lagos. His clothes were worn beyond repair, his face thinner, his steps slower, but his eyes still carried the same quiet determination. The city greeted him with cold air and unfamiliar silence. Paris was nothing like Lagos. The buildings stood tall and distant. The people moved quickly, rarely looking at one another. Everything felt far away. Babatunde stood at the edge of a busy street, taking it all in. He didn't understand the signs, didn't know the language, didn't know where to go. But he knew one thing. She was here, somewhere in this vast foreign world. His daughter was here. And that was enough to keep him moving. Finding the university was not easy. It took hours of asking, gesturing, and walking. Some people ignored him. Others looked at him with suspicion. But eventually someone pointed him in the right direction. When he finally saw the gates of the medical academy, something inside him shifted. Relief, disbelief, hope. He had made it. He stepped closer, his heart beating faster now. Students moved in and out of the gates, dressed in clean, confident clothing, speaking in tones he could not understand. Babatunde stood there quietly, out of place, unseen, but not for long. A security guard approached him, his expression guarded. "You cannot stay here," the man said, his voice firm. Babatunde didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. He stepped back slightly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. He held it up gently. My daughter, he said, pointing at the image. The guard frowned, confused. Babatunde tried again, his voice softer now. She is here. The guard hesitated, then sighed, gesturing for him to move further away from the gate. Babatunde nodded. He didn't argue, didn't protest. He simply stepped aside and waited. Hours passed. The cold seeped into his bones. His legs grew weak, but he did not leave, because he had not come this far. To turn away now. As the day moved on, something began to change. More people gathered, more movement, more noise. A sense of anticipation filled the air. Babatunde watched quietly. And then he saw it. Students dressed in formal robes, families gathering, cameras flashing, laughter echoing, a ceremony, a graduation. His heart began to race. Today, he whispered. He stepped closer to the gate, careful not to draw attention, and waited. Because somewhere in that crowd, Yetunde Olajide would appear. And when she did, everything would be worth it. Every pain, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. He tightened his grip on the photograph, his eyes scanning every face, every movement, every possibility, until finally, the moment he had been waiting for began to unfold. The courtyard of the medical academy shimmered with celebration. Rows of chairs filled quickly as families gathered, dressed in elegant coats and bright smiles, their laughter echoing softly beneath the pale Paris sky. Cameras flashed, voices overlapped in different languages. Pride hung in the air, visible, almost tangible. And among them, just beyond the iron gates, stood Babatunde. Still, silent, unseen. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched the photograph, his tired eyes searching the crowd with a quiet urgency that never faded. Every face that passed through the gates drew his attention. Every movement held the possibility of recognition. His daughter was here. He could feel it. Inside, the ceremony began. A voice carried across the courtyard, announcing names, achievements, years of dedication finally brought to a single moment of applause. Students walked across the stage one by one, dressed in dark academic robes, their steps steady, their futures wide open before them. Babatunde leaned closer to the gate, his breath shallow now. He didn't understand the language, but he didn't need to, because he was listening for something else, a name. Her name. Minutes stretched. Then, Yetunde Olajide. The sound cut through everything, even through the distance, even through the unfamiliar accent. Babatunde's body stiffened. His heart pounded against his chest as if it might break free. And then he saw her. She stepped forward with calm confidence, her posture straight, her face composed but radiant. The black robe flowed gently as she walked, the light catching the edge of her cap. Applause erupted around her, proud, loud, overwhelming. For a moment the world disappeared. There was only her, his daughter. No longer the small, frightened girl he had carried from a broken car. No longer the child who had studied under dim light in a leaking workshop. But a doctor, a woman, a future. Babatunde's eyes filled with tears. A smile broke across his face, tired, trembling, but filled with something pure. You did it, he whispered. He didn't realize he had stepped closer to the gate until a guard placed a hand firmly on his shoulder. You cannot enter, the man said. Babatunde nodded quickly, stepping back. I will stay here, he replied softly, though the guard did not understand. I will just stay here. Inside, Yetunde accepted her certificate. She shook hands. She smiled. She posed for photographs. Everything unfolded exactly as it should. Perfect, controlled, complete. But something small shifted when she turned away from the stage. Because in that brief moment as her eyes scanned the crowd, they stopped. Not on her friends, not on her professors, but beyond them, toward the gate, toward a figure that did not belong, a man, thin, worn, standing still among movement. Her breath caught. No, it couldn't be. For a second she blinked as if her mind was trying to correct what her eyes had seen. But he was still there, looking at her, holding something in his hands. And then she saw it. The photograph. The same one she had hidden away. The same one she had tried not to remember. Time slowed, the noise faded, and in that suspended moment 2 worlds collided, Lagos, Paris, past, present, and standing between them, Babatunde. Her heart began to pound not with joy, but with something far more complicated. Fear. Not fear of him, but fear of what he represented. The life she had left behind, the identity she had carefully reshaped, the truth she had chosen not to carry with her. Yetunde Chimamanda's voice broke through her thoughts. "Come, we need to take pictures," Adebayo waved from a distance. "Hurry." The moment stretched, torn between 2 directions, 2 versions of herself. She looked at him again. His face, so full of hope, so certain, so proud. And something inside her cracked, but not in the way it should have, because instead of stepping forward, she hesitated. Then slowly, she looked away. Just for a second. Just long enough. But when she looked back, the moment had changed. Babatunde had seen it, the hesitation, the distance, the choice. And though his smile didn't disappear, something in his eyes dimmed. Still he waited. Because hope does not die easily, not after everything. Minutes passed. Students gathered in groups taking photos, celebrating embracing loved ones. Yetunde stood among them, smiling, laughing, performing the role she had built so carefully. But her eyes, they drifted, again and again, toward the gate. He was still there, still waiting, still believing. Adebayo stepped beside her, following her gaze. "Do you know that man?" he asked. The question landed heavier than expected. Yetunde froze. Her mind raced. Every answer felt dangerous, every truth inconvenient. "No," she said. The word came out quickly, too quickly. Adebayo nodded unconcerned. "Probably just someone looking for work." Chimamanda added lightly, "They always come around places like this?" Yetunde forced a small smile. "Yes," she said softly. "Probably." Inside her chest, something twisted, but she pushed it down. Because this was not the moment. This was not the place. She had worked too hard, come too far, built too much. She couldn't risk it. Not now. Not here. At the gate, Babatunde shifted his weight slightly, his legs growing weaker. But he did not leave. Because he had seen her. And that was enough. Or at least, it was supposed to be. He lifted the photograph again, holding it gently, as if it could somehow bridge the distance between them. "My daughter," he whispered. His voice was lost in the noise, unheard, unanswered. Yetunde turned away once more. This time, longer. And when she looked back again, he was still there. But something had changed. Not in his position, not in his posture, but in the quiet space between them. A space that had once been filled with love, now filled with something else. Something colder, something final. And though the celebration continued, though laughter filled the air, though success wrapped itself around her like a well-earned reward, a truth had already taken root, unspoken, unavoidable, that the greatest distance between 2 people is not measured in miles, but in the moment one chooses to pretend the other does not exist. The celebration inside the academy continued louder, now laughter music glasses clinking in soft toasts of achievement. Yetunde stood among her classmates. Her smile carefully placed her posture steady, her voice measured as she responded to congratulations. You've done it, Chimamanda said, wrapping an arm around her. From Lagos to Paris, this is what success looks like. Adebayo raised his glass slightly. To Yetunde Olajide, the future of medicine. To Yetunde, others echoed. She smiled. She nodded. She said all the right things. But her mind was not there. Because beyond the music, beyond the polished voices and the glow of celebration, something else pressed against her thoughts. The image of a man standing outside the gate. Still, waiting. Holding on to something that belonged to a past she had tried to leave behind. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus, tried to stay present in the moment she had earned. But the memory would not fade. You're distracted, Adebayo said quietly, noticing the shift in her expression. No, she replied quickly, just tired. Chimamanda smiled knowingly. It's been a long journey. You deserve to enjoy this. Yetunde nodded. Yes, she said, I do. And for a moment she believed it. Outside, the cold had deepened. The sky was fading into evening shadows stretching across the courtyard as the crowd slowly began to thin. Babatunde remained at the gate. His body was no longer steady. His legs trembled beneath him, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. The long journey, the days without rest, the hunger he had ignored, it was all catching up to him now. But he stayed, because leaving was not an option. Not yet. He had seen her, but he had not spoken to her, and until he did, something inside him refused to move. A security guard approached again, more impatient this time. You cannot stay here, he said firmly, gesturing for Babatunde to leave. Babatunde didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. He shook his head gently. Please, he said, his voice soft. My daughter. The guard sighed, his tone hardening. No. He reached out, placing a firm hand on Babatunde's arm. The contact was enough. Babatunde stepped back instinctively. But he didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. Because dignity, even in the face of rejection, was something he had never lost. Still, he held on to the photograph. Still, his eyes remained fixed on the courtyard. Still, he waited. Inside, Yetunde moved through the final moments of the event. Photos, handshakes, conversations that blurred together. And yet beneath it all, a quiet unease grew. She excused herself from a group conversation and stepped aside, her breath slightly uneven. Her mind returned to the gate, to him, to the way he had looked at her. Not with expectation, not with accusation, but with something far more difficult to face. Pride. Unquestioning. Unconditional. And that made it worse, because it meant he still believed in her, still saw her the same way, still loved her. Her chest tightened. She closed her eyes briefly. This is not the time, she whispered to herself. But the thought didn't leave. Instead, it grew stronger, more insistent, until finally she moved. Not quickly, not impulsively, but deliberately, step by step, toward the gate. Babatunde saw her before she reached him. Even through the fading light, even through the distance, he recognized her immediately. The way she walked, the way she held herself. It was still there, beneath everything. My daughter, he whispered. His voice trembled, but his smile returned. Weak, hopeful, real. Yetunde stopped a few steps away from him, close enough to see every detail. The lines on his face, the wear in his clothes, the exhaustion in his posture. The truth she had not allowed herself to imagine. He looked smaller, weaker, older, and for a brief moment, something broke inside her. Papa. The word almost escaped her lips. Almost. But then footsteps behind her. Voices. Chimamanda and Adebayo approaching. You went off without us, Chimamanda said lightly. Adebayo glanced toward Babatunde, his expression shifting slightly. Is everything all right? He asked. The moment collapsed, just like that. The space between truth and choice narrowed again. Yetunde's heart pounded. She looked at Babatunde, then at her friends. 2 worlds, 2 identities, 2 paths, and only one she was willing to protect. She straightened slightly. Her expression changed. Not harsh, not cold, but controlled, careful, deliberate. She turned to Adebayo. I'm fine, she said. Then with a small gesture toward Babatunde, I think he's mistaken me for someone else. The words landed quietly, but their impact was absolute. For a second, no one spoke. Not even the air seemed to move. Babatunde blinked. Once, then again, as if trying to understand what he had just heard. The photograph slipped slightly in his hand. His lips parted, but no words came. Yetunde did not look at him again. She couldn't. Because if she did, everything would fall apart. Adebayo nodded, already losing interest. It happens, he said. Come, we should head back. Chimamanda added. Yes, it's getting cold. Yetunde nodded. Yes. She turned and walked away. Not quickly, not running, just leaving, as if nothing had happened, as if nothing had ever existed. Behind her, Babatunde remained where he stood. Still, silent. The noise of the city returned slowly, distant, muted. He looked down at the photograph in his hand, then back at the empty space where she had been. Something inside him shifted, not breaking, not collapsing, but settling. A quiet understanding, painful, but clear. He didn't chase her, didn't call out, didn't demand an explanation, because love for him had never been about holding on. It had always been about letting go when the time came, and perhaps that time had come. He took a slow breath, then another, steadying himself. The cold no longer mattered, the hunger no longer mattered. Even the journey felt distant now, because the answer he had come for had already been given, not in words, but in silence. He folded the photograph carefully, placed it back into his pocket, and for the first time since arriving in Paris, he turned away from the gate, not in anger, not in defeat, but in quiet acceptance. Because sometimes, the greatest sacrifice is not what you give, but what you choose not to take back. The night settled over Paris with a quiet indifference. Lights flickered on across the city, illuminating streets filled with movement, laughter, and lives that continued without pause. Inside a small apartment not far from the academy, Yetunde sat alone on the edge of her bed, still dressed in her graduation clothes. The celebration had ended hours ago. The voices had faded. The smiles had disappeared. But the moment at the gate remained. She hadn't spoken about it. Not to Chimamanda. Not to Adebayo. Not to anyone. And yet it refused to leave her. She closed her eyes, pressing her fingers lightly against her temples as if she could push the memory away. His face, his voice, the way he had looked at her. Not with anger, not with disappointment, but with something far worse. Understanding. That quiet, painful acceptance that required no explanation. Stop, she whispered to herself. This was necessary. The words sounded firm, controlled, justified. But something in her chest tightened, because no matter how many times she repeated it didn't feel true. Her gaze drifted slowly across the room until it stopped at the small drawer beside her bed. She hadn't opened it in months, not since the day she had decided to move forward without looking back. For a long moment she remained still. Then, almost without thinking, she stood up, walked toward it, and pulled it open. The photograph was still there, exactly where she had left it. A small, fragile piece of a life she had chosen to bury. Her fingers hesitated before touching it, but once they did, everything came rushing back. The workshop, the heat of Lagos, the sound of tools clinking in the early morning, the smell of oil and dust, the feeling of sitting beside him, reading under a dim light while he worked late into the night. Her breath caught. She sat down slowly, the photograph trembling slightly in her hands. "I think he's mistaken me for someone else." The words echoed in her mind. Her own voice, cold, distant, unrecognizable. She stared at the image of her younger self, so small, so dependent, so certain. "Who have I become?" she whispered. But the question had no immediate answer. Across the city, far from the lights and comfort of celebration, Babatunde sat alone beneath a narrow overhang near an unfamiliar street. The journey had ended, but he had nowhere to go. The little money he had left was barely enough to survive, and the strength he once relied on had faded with each passing day. He leaned back against the cold wall, his breathing slow, uneven. The pain in his side had worsened, but he did not complain, because pain had long been part of his life. What he felt now was something else. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. The edges were worn, the surface slightly faded, but the image remained. He studied it quietly, not as a reminder of what he had lost, but as proof of what had once been real. "She is alive," he said softly. "She is well." The words carried no bitterness, no resentment, only a quiet acceptance. Because for Babatunde, love had never been conditional. It had never depended on recognition, or gratitude, or return. It simply existed. Even now. Even here. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the cold settle around him. And then slowly he whispered, "You have your life now." A faint smile touched his lips. And that is enough. Back in her apartment, Yetunde hadn't moved. The photograph still rested in her hands, her thoughts unraveling in ways she had not allowed before. Memories surfaced one after another. Not just the big moments, but the small ones. The ones she had forgotten, or chosen to forget. The way Babatunde would pretend to eat before giving her his portion. The nights he stayed awake while she studied. The quiet pride in his voice whenever she succeeded. The lies he told not to deceive her, but to protect her from worry. Tears blurred her vision. She wiped them quickly, as if even now she was resisting something. "This doesn't change anything," she said aloud. "I made the right choice." But her voice lacked conviction, because deep down, she knew something had changed. Not in her life, but in her understanding of it. Her phone buzzed, suddenly pulling her from her thoughts. A message from Chimamanda. "Tonight was perfect. You handled everything well." Yetunde stared at the screen. Handled everything well. The words felt hollow, as if they belonged to someone else. Someone she had become, but not someone she fully recognized. She placed the phone aside, her attention returning to the photograph. And then something unexpected happened, a detail she had never noticed before. On the back of the photograph, there were words, faded, almost invisible. She turned it over carefully, and read them. "My daughter, no matter where life takes you, you will always have a home with me." Her breath caught. The handwriting was uneven, rough, but unmistakably his. Her vision blurred completely now, because for the first time, she understood something she had refused to see. He had never let go, not even when she had, not even when she walked away, not even when she denied him. And suddenly, the silence she had created between them felt unbearable. Her chest tightened, her heart raced, and a single thought rose above everything else. Where is he? Outside, the night grew colder. Babatunde's breathing became heavier, each inhale slower than the last. His strength was fading, not dramatically, not suddenly, but steadily, like a candle nearing its end. Still, he did not move, did not seek help, because he had never learned to ask for it. He simply sat there, holding on to the photograph, holding on to the memory, holding on to the love that had never changed, even if everything else had. Back in the apartment, Yetunde stood abruptly, her mind no longer quiet, her thoughts no longer controlled. Everything she had pushed away was now impossible to ignore. She grabbed her coat, her hands shaking. Because for the first time since that moment at the gate, she wasn't thinking about her future, or her image, or her place in the world. She was thinking about him, about what he had endured, about what she had done, and about what might already be too late. "Please," she whispered under her breath, "let me find him, because now—" She wasn't running from her past. She was running toward it, and she didn't know what she would find. But she knew one thing. She couldn't stay where she was anymore. Not after everything. Not after that truth. Not after finally understanding that some people don't leave your life. You are the one who leaves them. And the cost of that choice is something you can never truly escape. The cold night air hit Yetunde the moment she stepped outside. Paris no longer felt beautiful. It felt vast, unforgiving, and suddenly terrifying. Because somewhere in this endless city was a man who had crossed continents just to see her. A man she had turned away. And now, she didn't know where to find him. Yetunde walked quickly. At first, her breath uneven, her thoughts racing faster than her steps. The streets were alive with movement cars, passing people, talking, laughter echoing from nearby cafes. But none of it felt real. All she could see was his face. The way he had looked at her. The moment he understood. And the moment she walked away. Think she whispered to herself. Where would he go? He didn't know the city, didn't speak the language, had no money, no place. Her chest tightened painfully. He wouldn't go far. So she turned back, toward the academy, toward the only place he knew. When she arrived, the gates were nearly empty. The celebration was over. The lights were dimmer, the crowd gone. Only a few staff members remained cleaning up the remnants of the event. Yetunde rushed toward the entrance, her eyes scanning every corner. Nothing. No sign of him. She approached a security guard, her voice urgent. "Please, the man who was here earlier, outside the gate. Did you see him?" The guard looked at her confused. There were many people. "No," she insisted. "He was older, thin, wearing old clothes. He was holding a photograph." Recognition flickered across the guard's face. "Oh, that man." Her heart jumped. "Yes, where is he?" The guard shrugged. "He left." The words hit harder than expected. "Where did he go?" "I don't know," the guard replied. "He was told to leave. He walked away." Which direction she pressed. The guard pointed vaguely down the street. That way. Yetunde didn't wait. She ran. Her footsteps echoed against the pavement as she followed the direction, her eyes searching every corner, every shadow. "Papa," she called out. The word felt strange on her lips now, unfamiliar, but real. Papa people turned to look at her, some confused, some curious, but none of them were him. She kept moving, street after street, her breath growing heavier, her legs beginning to ache. But she didn't stop, because stopping meant accepting something she wasn't ready to face. That she might have already lost him. Time blurred. Minutes became hours. The city changed around her, from busy streets to quieter corners, from bright lights to dim alleys. And still, no sign of him. Yetunde slowed, finally her body giving in to exhaustion. She leaned against a wall, her breathing uneven, her mind spinning. "Where are you?" she whispered. Tears filled her eyes, because for the first time, she understood what it meant to search for someone who might not be found. The same way he had once searched for a way to save her. The same way he had fought to give her a future. And she had thrown it away. "No," she shook her head. "I won't give up." Across the city under a narrow overhang near an unfamiliar street, Babatunde remained where he had been. His body had grown weaker, the cold deeper, the pain sharper, but he was still there, still breathing, still holding on to the photograph. The world around him moved quietly, unaware, unchanged. He had tried to stand earlier, tried to move, but his legs had failed him. So he stayed, leaning against the wall, eyes half closed, somewhere between exhaustion and rest. A passerby slowed as they noticed him. "Sir," the man asked gently. No response. He stepped closer, concern growing. "Are you all right?" Babatunde's eyes opened slightly. He looked at the stranger, his vision blurred. "I am fine," he murmured, but the words carried no strength. The man frowned. "You don't look fine." Babatunde managed a faint smile. "I have seen what I came to see." The stranger didn't understand, but he didn't need to, because sometimes the truth is not in the words, but in the quiet way they are spoken. Meanwhile, Yetunde continued her search. She stopped people, asked questions, described him again and again. An older man, African, very thin, wearing worn clothes. Some shook their heads. Others didn't even stop. But one woman paused. "I think I saw someone like that," she said slowly. "Near the lower street, by the old buildings." Hope surged through Yetunde, where the woman pointed. That direction. Yetunde ran again, faster this time, her heart pounding, her mind filled with one thought. "Please, let me find him." The streets grew quieter, darker, less crowded, until finally she saw it. A narrow overhang, a figure beneath it, still, too still. Her steps slowed, fear creeping in. "Papa," she called softly. No response. She moved closer, each step heavier than the last. "Papa?" This time her voice broke. She reached him and knelt beside him. His face was pale, his body cold. But not gone. Not yet. "Papa," she cried, her hands shaking as she touched his arm. His eyes opened slowly, struggling, focusing. And when they found her, something changed. A faint light, recognition, "My daughter," he whispered. The words shattered everything. Yetunde broke, completely. "I'm here," she sobbed. "I'm here, Papa. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Tears fell freely now, uncontrolled, unstoppable. She held his hand tightly as if afraid he would disappear. "You came," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, you came. You came all this way." "And her voice collapsed under the weight of her own guilt. "I didn't see you. I didn't recognize you." Babatunde's weak smile returned. "I saw you. That was all he needed. That was all he ever needed." Yetunde pressed her forehead against his hand, her body trembling. "Please, don't leave me," she whispered. "Please." Because now she understood. Not just what he had done, but what she had almost lost. And for the first time since her journey began, nothing else mattered. Not Paris, not success, not status. Only this moment. Only him. Only the truth she could no longer escape. That everything she had become had been built on the love she almost abandoned. The cold pavement no longer mattered. The darkness of the street no longer mattered. The only thing that existed in that moment was the fragile rise and fall of Babatunde's breath. Yetunde knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to steady him, her tears falling freely without restraint. The proud, composed doctor she had become in Paris had disappeared completely. What remained was just a daughter. "Papa, stay with me," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "Please, don't close your eyes." Babatunde's breathing was shallow, each inhale slower than the last. His body felt lighter in her arms than she remembered, as if the strength he once carried had been worn away piece by piece. "I am here," he whispered. But even those words seemed to cost him effort. Yetunde looked around desperately. "Help!" she shouted, her voice breaking through the quiet street. "Please, someone help." The same man who had noticed Babatunde earlier returned, concern deepening on his face. "He needs a hospital," the man said quickly. "Yes," Yetunde cried. "Please help me." Together they lifted him carefully. His body barely resisted his weight, more absence than presence. A taxi was flagged down, and within moments they were moving through the nightlights, flashing past the city, blurring into something distant and unreal. Yetunde held Babatunde's hand tightly the entire way. "Stay with me," she repeated over and over. "You have to stay." At the hospital, everything moved fast. Too fast. Doctors rushed him inside, voices overlapping in urgent tones. Equipment appeared. Questions were asked. "What happened? Does he have any medical history? How long has he been like this?" Yetunde struggled to answer, her mind overwhelmed. I don't know." She admitted, her voice trembling. "He came from Nigeria. He's been traveling. He hasn't eaten properly." The doctors exchanged quick glances. "He's severely malnourished," one said, "and there may be internal injury." The words hit her like a physical blow. Internal injury. Malnourished. How long had he been suffering like this? How long had she not seen it? "Please." "Save him," she whispered. "We will do what we can," the doctor replied. And then they took him away. The waiting room was silent, cold, unforgiving. Yetunde sat alone, her hands clasped tightly, her mind replaying everything she had tried so hard to ignore. Every missed call, every unanswered message, every moment she had chosen distance over connection. "I thought I was moving forward," she whispered, "but I was just leaving him behind." Her chest tightened painfully, because now she understood something she hadn't before. Success had not made her stronger. It had made her forget. And that forgetting had almost cost her everything. Hours passed. Time stretched endlessly, until finally a doctor approached. Yetunde stood immediately. "How is he?" she asked, her voice barely steady. The doctor paused for a moment before answering. "He is stable, for now." Relief flooded her instantly, but it was fragile. He was in critical condition when he arrived, the doctor continued. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, and internal trauma, likely from an earlier injury that was never treated. Yetunde's breath caught. "He's going to be okay." "Right." The doctor didn't answer immediately. "He will need care," he said carefully. "Proper care. And time." She nodded quickly. "I'll do anything." The doctor studied her for a moment. "You are his family?" The question lingered. For a second, Yetunde couldn't speak, because the answer was no longer simple. But then she stepped forward. "Yes," she said firmly, "I am his daughter." When she was finally allowed to see him, the sight broke something inside her all over again. Babatunde lay on the hospital bed, his body still, his breathing supported by machines. The lines of pain had softened, but the weakness remained. He looked small. Not the man who had carried her, not the man who had built her future, but someone who had given everything and had nothing left. Yetunde moved closer, slowly, her steps uncertain. "Papa?" she whispered. His eyes opened faintly. And when they found her, the same expression appeared, that quiet, unwavering warmth, even now, even after everything. "You are here," he said softly. Tears filled her eyes instantly. "Yes," she nodded. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He studied her face for a moment, as if memorizing it. "You should not be here," he said gently. "You have your life." "No." She shook her head. "You are my life." The words came without hesitation, without doubt, because now they were true. "I'm sorry," she continued, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything I said, for everything I did. I didn't mean it. I was just trying to become someone," he finished quietly. She froze, because he understood. Even now, he understood. "I didn't want to lose what I built," she admitted. "And you thought I would take it from you?" he asked gently. She shook her head quickly. "No, I was afraid." "Of what?" She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "Of being seen as who I used to be." Silence filled the room. Then Babatunde spoke again. "You were never less because of where you came from." Her tears fell freely now. "I know that now, and I was never something you needed to hide." The truth of those words cut deeper than anything else. I didn't see it before, she admitted, but I see it now. He smiled faintly. "That is enough." She shook her head. "No, it's not enough. Not after everything you've done." She took his hand gently, holding it close. "You gave up your home, your health, everything, just so I could stand where I am today." He looked at her quietly. "And you did." "But at what cost?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't answer right away, because the answer was already there. In the silence, in the space between them, in everything that had happened. Yetunde leaned closer, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I won't let it end like this." His gaze softened. "It has already begun again," he said. She frowned slightly. "What do you mean, you came back?" he replied. "And that is where everything changes." That night, Yetunde didn't leave the hospital. She stayed beside him, not as a doctor, not as a graduate, but as a daughter. She watched over him as he slept, her mind no longer divided between past and present, because for the first time, she understood that they were never separate, that everything she had become was rooted in everything she had once tried to forget. And now, she would not forget again, no matter the cost, no matter what it meant for her future, because some things are more important than success, more important than status, more important than fear, and one of those things was the man lying beside her, the man who had given everything and asked for nothing in return. Morning light filtered softly through the hospital window, touching the edges of the room with a quiet warmth that felt almost sacred. For the first time in many days, the air no longer carried urgency or fear. Yetunde sat beside the bed, her head resting lightly against her folded arms. She had not slept much, but her eyes were calm now, not because everything was fixed, but because something inside her had finally settled. She was no longer running. When Babatunde stirred, she lifted her head immediately. "Papa," she said softly. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the light. It took a moment before he fully focused on her face, but when he did, the same gentle recognition returned. "You are still here," he murmured. Yetunde smiled through the tears that instantly filled her eyes. "I told you I'm not going anywhere." He studied her expression as if searching for doubt. But there was none. Only certainty. Only truth. The days that followed were quiet but full. Recovery was slow. Babatunde's body had endured too much for too long, and healing required patience. Doctors monitored him carefully, adjusting treatments, ensuring he regained strength little by little. And Yetunde stayed. She attended to him personally, not as a trained doctor proving her skills, but as a daughter rediscovering what it meant to care. She fed him when he was too weak to lift his hand. She adjusted his blankets when the cold returned. She sat beside him for hours, even when there was nothing to say. Because presence was enough. One afternoon, as sunlight warmed the room, Babatunde spoke again. "You should go back," he said gently. Yetunde looked up immediately. "Go back where? To your life," he replied. "Your work, your future." She shook her head without hesitation. "This is my life." He smiled faintly. "You have worked too hard to reach this place, and you are the reason I did," she said firmly. He fell silent for a moment, considering her words, then asked quietly, "What will you do now?" The question lingered not as pressure, but as an opening. Yetunde took a slow breath. "I used to think success meant leaving everything behind," she said, "starting over, becoming someone new." Babatunde listened. "But now I understand," she continued, her voice steady. "It's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming who you were meant to be without forgetting where you came from." His eyes softened. "And who are you meant to be?" She met his gaze. "A doctor who doesn't turn away from people like us." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Truth, purpose, and something deeper. Healing. Weeks passed. Babatunde grew stronger. Slowly, steadily. The pain in his body eased. His movements returned, though not fully. But he no longer struggled to breathe, no longer drifted between weakness and silence. He was present again. And with each day, Yetunde felt something else return. Not just relief, but connection. The kind that had never truly disappeared, only been buried beneath fear and distance. One evening, as they sat quietly together, Yetunde spoke again. "I've been thinking about something." Babatunde turned to her. "What is it? I don't want to stay in Paris," she said. He frowned slightly. "You have built something here." "I know," she nodded. "But I didn't come this far just to become comfortable." He waited. "I want to go back," she continued, "to Nigeria." The words settled between them. "To Lagos." "Yes." "And do what?" She smiled faintly. "The same dream I told you years ago." His eyes searched hers. "To help people who have no one." He exhaled slowly. "That will not be easy." "I know. You will face the same struggles we faced before. I know. You may not have the life you see here." "I don't want that life anymore," she said gently. Silence followed. Then Babatunde nodded, because he understood, not just her words, but her choice. The decision was not immediate. There were responsibilities to complete, formalities, opportunities to consider. But Yetunde remained firm. She declined offers that once would have meant everything. She stepped away from a future built on prestige alone. And instead, she chose purpose. Months later, under a different sky, they returned to Lagos. The city had not changed. Still loud, still crowded, still full of life and struggle intertwined. But this time, they saw it differently, not as something to escape, but as something to serve. With the help of a small network and the little savings Yetunde had managed to keep, they began something modest. A small clinic. Nothing grand, nothing perfect. Just a simple space where people could come without fear of being turned away. And they came. Mothers with sick children, workers with untreated injuries, elderly men who had long given up on care. People like them, people they understood. And for the first time, everything felt right. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Lagos, casting golden light across the dusty streets, Yetunde stood outside the clinic watching as the last patient left. Babatunde sat nearby, resting. Not working, not struggling, just present. She walked over and sat beside him. "You see," she said softly, "we did it." He looked at her, a quiet pride in his eyes. "No," he replied. "You did it." She shook her head. "We did." He smiled. And this time, there was no distance between them. No silence, no hesitation, only understanding. Yetunde reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph. The same one. Worn, faded, but still whole. She looked at it for a moment, then placed it gently in Babatunde's hand. "Keep it," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "I thought it was yours now." She smiled. "It was." She paused. "But I don't need it anymore." He looked at her confused. While she met his gaze, her voice steady. "Because I'm no longer afraid of remembering." The words settled quietly, but their meaning was everything. As night fell, the small clinic stood quietly under the fading light. Not a symbol of wealth, not a mark of status, but something far greater. A place built not on ambition, but on sacrifice, on love, on the kind of truth that cannot be forgotten once it is finally understood. And for Yetunde Olajide, that truth had come at a cost, but it had also given her something she could never lose again: her way back. In life, we often believe that success means moving forward, leaving behind the past, the pain, the people who remind us of where we started. We chase new identities, new spaces, and new recognition, thinking that growth requires distance. But this story reminds us of something deeper. You can rise without forgetting. You can become more without losing who you are. And most importantly, the people who sacrifice for you, the ones who stand behind your journey when no one else sees, are not part of your past. They are part of your foundation. Yetunde almost learned this too late. She gained the world, but nearly lost the one person who gave her everything. And in the end, she discovered a truth many of us ignore. Success without gratitude is empty. Progress without connection is fragile. And a future built on forgetting will always call you back. So take a moment today. Think about the people who stood by you when you had nothing, the ones who believed in you before the world ever did. Have you thanked them? Have you called them? Or have you, like Yetunde once did, placed distance where there should be love? If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? What time is it in your country right now? And if you believe in stories that remind us of what truly matters, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the greatest journeys are not the ones that take us far away, but the ones that bring us back home.